Great. You can see the recording flashing. Great. Well, welcome everyone to our first distinguished lecture of 2021. I'm very happy and great honor to introduce Mary Czerwinski from Microsoft Research. We first met during my first internship at MSR in 2004. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes,
but that's
yes,
when
I do.
I remember having a wonderful meeting with you in your office and just talking about everything. So quick background, you're a partner research manager. Not even too sure what that means, but it sounds important or sounds like actionable.
Executive level.
Okay. Of the Human Understanding and Empathy, which has a very cool acronym, HUE research group. And you have many fellows, and you've been inducted into the Chi Academy. You're a fellow of the ACM, European Alliance for Innovation Fellow, and most interesting, at least to me as a computer science person, is you're also a fellow of the American Psychological Science Association, which is, goes back to your PhD being in cognitive psychology, which those of you that aren't as familiar with HCI, this is, there's definitely a very solid branch of HCI in cognitive science, and this makes a lot of sense. I've got two personal notes just before I give Mary the floor. One is that you cited two of my papers, my very first two papers in this invited research overview, which I don't know if you realize it, but I think it really helped those papers a lot to get traction and ultimately helped my career. Like those are very highly cited papers. So thanks. That was.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I've put that on many grants. So, and there's another thing. I don't know if you remember WIS 2007 in Newport.
Mm-hmm.
We had this great dinner with the U of T folks mostly and a lot of MSR folks, and there's a lot of really animated conversation. And you kind of took the floor during this lively debate and said, hey, all of you doing these cool new interaction techniques, you should really think about doing work that has sort of bigger picture and goes beyond and has more impact. And there was more debate because at WIST, this is a very relevant thing to bring up. And it really, I don't know, and I still go back to that. Even now when I think of research problems, a little voice in my head says, what would Mary think? I'm not kidding.
Aww.
And I think of that one dinner, and I still do kind of crazy, cool one-off things because I have this art school background. I can't shake it, but I do think about it, and we do lots more, formative studies and try to, get some of these bigger picture inputs. So thank you for that. Anyway, I'll end with that, and I'll give Mary the floor, and please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What a warm and welcoming introduction. Thank you, Daniel. And your work was very impactful, by the way, so that was no stretch on my part. So great to be here, sort of. I can't see any of you, which really stinks, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But today I'll be talking about technologies for promoting emotional resilience and well-being. And the work my group has done for the last, I would say, around 8 to 9 years. So just by way of agenda, I'm going to talk about an overview of our group and how we've been rooted over the years in stress and focus, or / productivity, because we've done a ton of work on productivity, even from stretching back 25 years to the early days when I worked with George Robertson and we did 3D user interfaces. We were always focused on productivity. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, not a lot, about digital interventions and how we're looking at how users touch technology for their human needs. And often that's through search. So even though I am not a search expert at all, I find myself and our group constantly being pulled into the search domain just because that's where people satisfy a lot of their human needs. Then I'm going to talk about Sensei and our new and very recent work into telehealth. In fact, Daniel McDuff will be giving you video snippets about his work there, and what applications that we designed from Sensei. Sensei is an emotion sensing app. We can never know users' real emotions, I will stress multiple times, but we can see how you're facially displaying emotion. We can see your gestures. We can hear how your voice is sounding. And we can make some guesses about how you're feeling. They may not be right. They may just be what you're projecting. And I'll talk about what we're doing with the platform that looks at that, including 2 applications, Meeting Coach and Effective Spotlight, which we did last summer and both got into Kai. And our very recent work on ethics, we're actually trying to look at sensitive uses of effective computing technology, both inside and outside of Microsoft, and trying to provide guidance. We have an internal team at Microsoft that looks at any sensitive use cases that our partners are starting to dabble in using effective computing technologies, and either saying, no, this should not be done, or this is way too early to be done, or this is fine. It's an appropriate use of the technology. And then I was going to talk about collaborations with industry, but it sounds like we're going to skip that part for today. All right, so we targeted stress and productivity at work forever. I've been at Microsoft for 25 years, if you can believe that. And that wasn't the first place I ever worked, giving my age away. But we've always looked at productivity. And one of the things that we've started to be able to do, we started with a desire to do, now we're able to do, is looking at the ebb and flow of affect during the day, especially at work. At work is easier, as you'll see, because we can use the context of what you're doing on your PC to actually ascertain more information about what you're actually doing. When you're mobile, we can kind of tell where you are and maybe if you're active or not, but we can't always necessarily know exactly what tasks you're working on or what context you're in as well. So, but we do both, but especially we target work when you're sitting in front of your computer and you're kind of, you know, kind of not moving so much. And our goal in the eventuality was to build this affect sensing and synthesis platform that we can use to build emotionally sentient systems, services, and agents. And I'll give you some very brief snippets of what those things are like. But suffice it to say, we did that, we succeeded, and we're making some good progress on all those fronts. So why did we target stress and well-being? Well, if you read any study, and I mean any study, whether it's from the World Health Organization, Psychological Association, any individual corporation, you'll see that stress is the #1 cost and the #1 workplace problem that companies have to deal with. The costs to a company around stress way overshadow anything like heart disease, cancer, alcoholism, you name it, because stress causes so many problems. It causes shoulder and back problems, gastrointestinal problems, absenteeism. It spirals into anxiety and depression. There are just so many things that stress is an indirect or direct cause of, that it costs corporations tons of money. And now with COVID, as you can imagine, this has all just been exacerbated. We had a mental health symposium a couple of weeks ago, and the CEO of Mental Health America spoke, and it was so scary how bad. She said the increase in calls to their organization have gone up significantly, but not just for minor calls, for very seriously mental ill distress calls have gone up. So the bottom line is, if your workers are under stress, they're multitasking, they're doing too much email, they're in too many Zoom meetings, there's going to be a perceived sense of less productivity, but also a very real sense of lower well-being. And we have ample evidence that I can share with you across multiple studies. You can look online and see some of our recent papers around this. Unfortunately, it turns out females are bearing more of the brunt of this than males, and that's kind of something societally we need to deal with. So since mental health problems are the leading cause of disability, and with this global pandemic affecting so many of us, we think people want better ways to monitor and manage their moods. And most people know if they're stressed or not, but most people don't know what to do about it. So, the coping mechanisms most people are aware of are exercising, sleeping, eating better, maybe using alcohol and tobacco or other kinds of narcotics. Most people don't meditate every day or do yoga, stretch. So we feel like if we can use technology to guide people a little bit and nudge them in the right direction without being patronizing, this could be a great thing for society. So our general method across many years has been something like this. And this is work that we started with Gloria Mark from UC Irvine. And it's mostly Shamsi, Iqbal, me, and Gloria who have done these studies. But there have been many years of studies with many people coming in and out of the collaboration. Because of Gloria being a social psychologist, we always look at the background of the people we study longitudinally. So we'll do the Big 5 personality survey on them to look for things like neuroticism, introversion, extroversion, impulsivity. We look at their job requirements. Do they have a lot of latitude in terms of what kinds of tasks they do, or are their jobs very narrowly prescribed by someone else, which has a huge influence on their perceived levels of stress. And then we do all kinds of validated stress surveys. And then we'll, most of the time, slap a couple of wearables on our participants. If they have wearables, we just leverage what they're using. If not, we'll give them Fitbits. Sometimes we would use heart rate monitors. Sometimes we would have a social badge or a camera around their neck so we could see who they were talking to, etc. We look at their sleep. So whether we're using a device to measure that, or we're asking them at the end of the day or beginning of the day how they slept. And then we log everything they do on their computers, 24/7, everything on their devices. So we kind of know what windows in the foreground, what windows are open. We know what apps they're using and for how long, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, we'll do an end of the day productivity survey, like, did you get things done that you meant to do? We often do this in the morning as well. What were you going to do for the day? And then at the end of the day, did you get that done? Why or why not? And how do you feel about it? So we've done this for many years, usually around 40 to 100 people, usually around 2 weeks, sometimes longer. And so we asked the question, how bad is the focus and stress problem really? Because everybody complains about information overload, but you know, is it really as bad as people think it is? And it turns out that it's pretty bad, unfortunately, I hate to report. People switch back and forth between windows on their computer like ridiculously often. The average in any given study is around 20 seconds before you switch screens. We know for a fact that constant multitasking and task switching plus email is the great denominator of stress. Any study we've ever done with email increases perceived and actual stress when we measure it through cortisol or whatever physical measurement we're using. And it always decreases perceived productivity. So now with COVID, and some of us were just having a little parlance before the talk, with everybody multitasking while they're in meetings, because otherwise, how are you going to get work done? Probably the quality of our decision making and the quality of our projects that we're working on is decreased or decreasing because of this constant multitasking and switching. So it's a bad thing. I love this figure. I've been using this figure now for about 3 years. It's so cool in so many ways. I don't want you to look at every line, but what I want you to listen to is what I'm saying is the double, we used to call it the double hump, now we call it the double peak day. So no matter when you come into work and whether you're at home or remote, you will have a double peak day. It's just part of our physiology. It has to work this way. And we've seen this repeatedly through many studies, but now we can actually see it automatically, which is super cool. People come in the morning and do not get right to work, right? When we used to all commute, we would think about our day during the commute. We would get to work, we'd get our coffee, we'd meet and greet our colleagues who were there that early if you came in early, or that late if you came in late. And then we'd get to our desk. We used to read the New York Times or whatever your journal of choice is and answer our email. And then around 10 o'clock, we would actually be getting down to business, right? That would be our first peak of the day. If you came in around 7 or 8, your first peak of the day is usually around 10 a.m. in the morning. If you come in 11 a.m., it's going to be a different time, but it'll be approximately the same phasic kind of intervals. And then what happens is you focus, and as humans, we cannot sustain perfect focus for that long. And what you have to do is you have to cognitively replenish. So that's why we go and we get lunch, and we are social, or we take walks, we get out of the office. We need that refreshment. And our research has actually shown that a 20-minute walk will make you come back to work much more, significantly more creative, right? So this is just human nature. And as I said, this has been validated over and over again. Even when I started reading the literature on stress, and I started reading about cortisol and circadian rhythms and whatnot, all of these physiological factors tie into this. Your cortisol starts to wane as the day goes on. Your circadian rhythm has this need for the peak midday. That's why many cultures take naps after lunch, for instance, to just replenish. So this double peak day is a thing. And what it tells us is that people don't come to work ramped up and ready to go. It takes them a while to get into a state of focus, and that we have this mid-morning and mid-afternoon peaks. Now, since this study, our Sensei software, which I was telling you about earlier, has identified the same patterns automatically, just using the camera and the microphone to detect these kinds of patterns. And so because of this, we've started getting very interested in designing systems that respect users' personal rhythms of work. So I won't be focusing today. I actually wish I would, because I think I'm going to have a little more time, but we can talk about it in the Q&A afterwards. We've designed 2 focus agents in conjunction with people at Microsoft who work on an area called My Analytics, which looks at what people are doing on their laptops and tries to make recommendations for them based on kind of like norms that they see across populations. So maybe you answer email too quick, or too often, or too long during the day compared to your colleagues. And maybe you should stop sending email really late at night, or put a postpone. That's where we came up with the postpone feature. Don't send it until the morning so you don't bother people late at night. So in conjunction with the My Analytics team, we built 2 focus agents that kind of respected these rhythms. So the focus agent, if you told it in the morning what you wanted to do that day, it could schedule tasks for you with the labels you gave those tasks automatically, but it would respect your lunchtime and it would respect your nighttime. So it would do the best it could with the parameters of the rhythm of workday for you. And that was very powerful. And I think the Teams team and the Outlook teams are paying very close attention to this rhythm of workday finding now, because we don't have commutes anymore. So now we've built virtual commute into our products. And now you can schedule focus time, but now it's going to safeguard your lunch breaks and give you me breaks as options so you can exercise or catch up on email. So very cool product transfer just from noticing these rhythms of work. All right, so I'm going to do kind of a sharp pivot here.
There's a question.
Yes. Oh, sure. Please jump in with questions.
Yeah, I'll read it out. How do you control for the impact of the productivity assessment itself? Having intentional time to reflect on one's goals and achievements, as well as accountability to the researchers, seems it might be a large confounder.
That is such a great question, in so many angles. Getting a big echo here. So, of course, there's, the Hawthorne effect. We don't assume that. However, the reflection part you bring up is huge. And we had seen that in previous research that Shanzi had done with an intern. So we knew that the end of the day reflection piece was going to be really important on a variety of levels, including all the ones you mentioned. And so with our agent, the agent would ask you when you were going to leave work at the end of the day. And the agent would pop up about 50 minutes before that and try to have a little interview with the user. And we actually made our agent emotionally sentient to some degree. So If the user was super stressed or focused, the agent would not bother that user. But if the user was amenable to it, you could always tell the agent to go away. But if the user was amenable, they would have this reflection conversation. And we found that in multiple studies, this reflection about how your day went was very powerful, regardless of the research. It was just very, very powerful for the end user. And they talked about that a lot in their open-ended questions and interviews. So that they started to reason about why they didn't get tasks accomplished, to the point that then they started to change their actual behavior. I'd actually seen this in 2004 in a diary study I did, where the reflection of doing the diary caused people to change their behavior, which was frustrating for me as a researcher, but was super important for me as a researcher, because I got to see that effect. So we've been building that into our focus agents, both versions. We've had 2 versions now. And now the product teams are really understanding that reflection at the end of the day does a number of things. One, it allows you to cognitively offload those tasks you didn't finish. There's something called the Zeigarnik effect, which is, oh, I hope I'm saying the right word. I think it's the Zeigarnik effect, where if you don't finish a task, you keep processing it, and that causes cognitive burden for many hours beyond when the task supposedly was stopped. So you get rid of that problem so that people can free up their cognitive resources for spending time with their loved ones or whatever it is they want to do after work. But the other thing it does is it allows you to literally rethink how you effectively work. And I think that's even a bigger thing about moving forward. So yes, we saw people very much change their habits and behaviors in only 3 weeks, which is outstanding. Hopefully that answered your question. Is there any follow-up?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, so like I said, sharp pivot, we're gonna look at psychosocial interventions. So what's the direct consequence of being constantly stressed at work, constantly stressed in life, maybe you had a traumatic event? There are gonna be psychosocial consequences. And we were fortunate enough to be approached by Dr. Marcia Linehan. She's the inventor of a therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. Most people know CBT, and CBT is definitely a component of DBT. But DBT is the #1 worldwide agreed upon professionally therapy for suicide prevention and borderline personality disorder. Just a few years ago, Marcia came out as saying she has borderline personality disorder, and it was her affliction that actually allowed her to invent this therapy that is so successful with so many people. And she approached me because she wanted to make this therapy more widely available to so many millions of people who are suffering from anxiety, depression, and suicidal intention. So we did. We took, you see 2 books on the left there. Those were her handbooks. The other problem with DBT was that not enough people were professionally trained to deliver it successfully because it's not CBT, it's different. And so Marcia was also lamenting that fact. And she also said, Mary, I don't even know why certain people who we train become so successful at it and some people don't. And so there was even a question on her part of, can you do the machine learning to figure out what predicts a successful therapist in DBT? We never got to that part. She has since retired, and but we did work with one of her PhD students to put this online, this therapy online. And I'm showing you 2 pictures here. One is the hub. The first one is the hub, and that shows all the modules of DBT. The cool thing about DBT is you have to go through this therapy in steps. So you start out with some basics. If you're really suicidal, you make a contract with your therapist, which we put Marcia online as the therapist. And she's got a very commanding personality, so that worked really well. Having a very professional persona as your character in a chat-based interface turns out to be a hugely successful way to go. And so we put most of her DBT modules online, and the users would go through them step by step. I've gone through all of them. They're amazing. I don't know why we all don't take this kind of training. And then you would talk with Marcia just like you would talk with any therapist in DBT. So the nice thing about having Chelsea on our staff for 3 months was that she brought the DBT training manual to life. You really felt like you were talking to Marcia. And even though it looked like it was intelligent, like it listened to the problems you were describing and what you were saying, really the bot just parroted back what you said, but in a way that the therapist would have always said it anyway, because there are just very clear rules about how therapists interact in DBT. So it was really good. It's probably the most successful and professional app my team has ever built. We had professional designers working on it. We had Chelsea making sure that it was clinically efficacious, which it was. In all cases, regardless of what disorder the patients, we had 73 patients using this app, regardless of what, whether it was generalized anxiety or suicidality or borderline personality disorder, they all improved over 4 weeks using our app. The people that were the hardest to treat are the people that are the hardest to treat in face-to-face therapy, which is the borderline personality disorders. But for many, it could have saved their lives. I will never say that, but it could have definitely kept them from harming themselves. So the psychologists, they look at these scales called OASIS, PHQ 9, which are just depression scales, and they actually have this way of saying whether or not you've recovered or not, or just improved. And you can see here for the OASIS and PHQ 9, we had significant numbers of patients actually recovering through 4 weeks of use of the app. What we found that was super cool about this, and that I will take away as we move into more trying to help people during the workday, is that because these skills were in an app that was in your pocket, you could use them in the moment. So just think about being stressed out before you give a distinguished lecture at a university. You might have a lot of stress. You could pull out your Pocket Skills app on your phone and do a little mindfulness exercise or deep breathing, just to bring it to down to the general population and how they could use something like this. And you would see that it worked. So you would learn, oh, I actually like doing this particular skill and it actually works for me, and I could do it without having to talk to anybody. So for a lot of people that have serious mental illness, you feel like you're a burden sometimes to your loved ones and caretakers. And of course you're not, but you may feel that way. And so it increased self-efficacy dramatically, as we found from the open-ended comments and interview results, that I can do this on my own and it actually works, which is going to make me feel like I might want to learn another skill, maybe a harder skill to accomplish that might help me work and be even more effective. And it becomes this really great circle of self-efficacy and belief that you can improve. So it was a really awesome project. Unfortunately, at that time, mental illness wasn't as, shall we say, as a popular a topic as it is right now. And the Microsoft lawyers were extremely nervous that someone would commit suicide while using our app. So we actually had to give this app back to Marcia Linehan and take Microsoft's name off of it. But we have the infrastructure for the app. And now that it's much more well accepted that mental illness is something we all need to talk about and pay attention to, especially during COVID, we're repopulating the app with more CBT content, and other content that might be more appropriate for the workplace. And we've got great product team partners now in Windows, Workplace Analytics, pretty much across all our experiences and devices, to try to infiltrate our products with health and well-being interventions that people would do, like deep breathing, that are very easy to do, that don't take a lot of time. And sometimes you can even do them without stopping your work, which makes them a little bit implicit and easier to negotiate. All right, any questions on that before I move on? Let me check my time here. Okay.
There's not more questions in the chat, so go ahead.
Great. All right, so I had mentioned previously that we built this affect sensing platform called Sensei. It's kind of an umbrella project. Many pieces and parts of it have already made their way into many products at Microsoft. If you've ever used our Azure Cognitive Services, where you can get face detection, smile detection, things like that, voice transcription. So many of our algorithms are out there already. We're also integrated into this framework called PSI, which is publicly available for free to academics. It's a multimodal sensing platform that can be used to easily build, debug, and prototype in robotics, in VR, AR, and with 3D characters. So you can see here that the things we do in Sensei. One of the more popular things people use it for is just seeing is the face in the camera. So hello, is the user even there, right? We can use it for head nods and head shakes, which I'll be talking about in a second in one of our applications. Daniel is one of the world's leading experts on deriving physiological signals from the camera. He just had a couple very popular papers at NeurIPS, and I'll be sharing a little bit of that with you in a second. So he can get heart rate variability, which is a key indicator of stress, oxygen saturation, breathing rate, things like that. We can listen to the sound of your voice. Stress does really come to play in the vocal signal. Your glottal muscles might tighten when you're stressed, therefore having a very strong signature in your audio imprint. And we look at things like prosody, loudness, stochasticity, things like that, to look at, are you being commanding? Are you, we can look at whether you're talking over someone or not, things like that. And then of course we can do speech to text and look at the content of what you say if that's appropriate. And lastly, the peripherals actually are very useful for stress detection. Javier Hernandez on my team had done some work when he was an intern with us, just looking at how hard you type on your keyboard. And that's actually indicative of stress. He also showed that you put an extra finger on your mouse when you're stressed. You hold the mouse more tightly and with more digits because you're stressed. We have colleagues at Berkeley, Pablo Paredes and John Canny and all, and they have shown swiping behavior, and the way you hold your mouse is also indicative of stress. So there are many implicit signals we could be using to look at stress as well. But this platform, this multimodal sensing platform, has been really, really useful to us. Meanwhile, Daniel's been developing sensing for telehealth.
Is focusing on physiological sensing. So we've been doing some work that we published at NeurIPS in a few weeks, which is looking at building state-of-the-art heart and breathing sensing from the camera, putting that on mobile devices using TVM, which is a deep learning compiler, to optimize performance and get high frame rates, but very accurate measurement as well of the pulse and respiration rate of the individuals.
Okay, it sounds like he's done. I can't hear him, so I'm going to move on.
Here are just some examples of videos inputs, and you can see there's a lot of head motion, which makes it challenging to extract the pulse signal. The blue signals reflect the ground truth, and the red are our predictions from our algorithm. And we've been able to reduce error in performance quite significantly using these approaches, both for measuring heart rate and respiration rate. And actually, we have a live webinar right now, which is capturing this work.
Okay, it looks like he's done. All right, so in addition to telehealth, we've had many, many applications built on the Sensei components, as I was saying before. And I'm going to talk about Meeting Coach and the effective spotlight there on your far right. But we've done so many things with this. So I say the effective computing platform has been an amazing research vehicle for us. I've talked about the focus agent, which was built on the activity streamer, which looked at what you were doing on your computer. The one thing I didn't say about the focus agent was it would actually sense how you were feeling. And so if it saw that you were stressed or bored, the system could actually suggest a variety of opportunities for you to get back on task or take a break. And so we did all of those. If you opted in to get sent suggestions for healthy work breaks and you were bored, that's when the agent would, if agents assumed you were bored, predicted you were bored, it would pop up if you had opted into that and say, hey, it might be a good time to go take a walk. And people did it. It was great. They got more steps in. We've done applications for user researchers to actually run studies on prototypes and kind of see how users were responding physiologically or at least gesturally with their facial gestures to the new software that they were designing. And that was super successful. We did a big art installation called Ada in Building 99 that showed the mood of the building, which is kind of cool. It looks like a brain, but it was purely artistic. And we've had some real interesting designs around conversational agents that you can say anything to and will respond back in a very open conversational way, but looking at mimicry. So if the agent speaks the way you speak, we already know that you like agents that have the personality type like yours, right? Cliff Nass kind of did that work a long, long time ago. But do you like agents better that talk the way you talk, or emote the way you emote, or reflect your emotions? And indeed, we've got very interesting findings on that. And it's completely new territory in psychology for how visually an agent should react to your visage when you're having a conversation. Completely new territory. There's no guidance by theory there. So it's like one of my favorite areas right now. And just to cut the story short, mimicry is not the answer. We've tried, just mimicking, and we don't mimic each other visually all the time. And I'm really proud of a long line of research that we've been able to enable with Andy Bagel and John Tong doing, that's not John Tong, but it's one of Andy's participants, doing video calling for people that are neurodiverse. So if you have ADHD or you're on the autism spectrum, this all remote meeting situation can cause serious problems. But also if you have low vision or hearing problems, as one of your colleagues is dealing with right now, what can we do? And how can we let these people who are having any kinds of issues like this feel more included and incorporated into the conversation, and knowing emotionally what's happening in the room? Like, where were people confused? Where were people like all looking like they were in agreement? So the augmenting the transcripts and the videos of remote meetings has been a research project that I'm super proud of, that Andy and John Tong are doing. And then we're actually collaborating with Steelcase, like in the design of the future of work. How can we use mood and improve mood to make better designs? So I'm going to talk about the Meeting Coach project. Checking my time here. Okay, we're still good. It used to be meetings were like this, and you might have one person on the screen that's remote, but pretty much everybody was ignoring that person. And now, we have the great equalizer. We're all remote. We're all in this situation. And how do we make sure that people are being included? It used to be really bad for that one remote person on the screen, because the rest of us were all getting, a plethora of social signals from each other about how we were feeling, how we were doing, how much we were paying attention. And we were lucky if that poor remote person even got included. But now it's a great equalizer, but it's also a great problem, right? How do we make sure everyone's included? So assuming everyone has their camera turned on and their mic turned on, which is never the case anymore, but assuming that, we can do quite well. So what we did was we did a study with 8 teams that knew each other over 4 weeks, that had weekly meetings, team meetings, sometimes more than weekly. All of these team members opted in to work with us on Meeting Coach, and they all opted in to have their cameras turned on, their mics turned on, and have our meeting bot join the meeting and record what was going on from everybody's feeds. And how we decided to analyze this data was we used Sensei, of course, We looked at face detection. So we tried to see what kind of facial action unit movement we were getting there. For people that don't know what that is, that's lip curls, eye squinting, corrugator muscles, teeth showing, things like that. Things typically associated based on Ekman's theory with a variety of emotions, but we're not subscribers of Ekman's theory per se, but we do ascribe to using facial action units to project or predict what emotions people might be trying to portray. So we do detection on that. We can also obviously look at the speech to text transcription and do sentiment analysis on that. We can look at voice activity. In particular, not necessarily were we looking at voice activity for the detection of emotion, but really looking at who was talking when and who was talking over whom and interrupting whom. So we had these 8 teams. We did all kinds of interviews and surveys with them, as well as with a broader swath of Microsoft employees. And based on that survey and what people said they needed, we developed a wireframe prototype dashboard and then eventually an interactive dashboard based on their actual data. So what I'm showing you here is what we submitted to Kai and got accepted to Kai this year, which is the final design. We went through a great user-centered design process over 3 months, but this is the final design. So on the left hand, what you're seeing is amount of participation across participants. Of course, you don't see who the other participants are, but you get to see who you are, and you can see how much each person in the group participated on average. This is for the one meeting. And what the sentiment in the room was on average. You don't get to see who was expressing what kind of sentiment, you just get to see on average. What was the tone in the room? And then the only historical graph we have is there on the bottom of the left-hand side where you see your participation history by meeting. So over time, how active have you been in terms of participating in the meeting? That's mostly talking time. And on the right side, you see a summary of a meeting after the fact. So this isn't a real-time thing. We actually had prototypes that were real-time during the meeting, but they were kind of distracting. So what we decided to do was this after the meeting analysis. And so it shows you the whole video of the meeting, obviously, but just below it, it shows who is talking when during the video and the transcript. And all of these components are interactive. So if you want to just see Sarah and where Sarah talked, you could click on Sarah and just go to those parts of the video. Likewise, you can see sentiment across time. You don't get to see anyone singled out except for yourself. So these are for your eyes only. And you can see, you know, how you're feeling positive or negative over time during the whole meeting. So you could click on where there was a lot of happiness if you missed the meeting and you just wanted to see where there was amusement and fun going on in social time, or maybe where everybody was upset is more important for that particular meeting. We did this analysis called consensus, where we looked at where we saw head nods and head shakes. So that might actually be more informative, and people definitely liked this feature. If you missed a meeting, it was like super useful to go back to those moments of consensus or dissent and see what the issues were and who was talking around those. We also analyzed the text for questions. So you can go back and see at any point where anyone asked a clarifying question or a question of any kind and see who it was, each to that part of the video. And then who was speaking when, and importantly, who might have been speaking over whom is an interesting thing, and you can click on any of those moments. But if it's you and you see that you're speaking over people a lot, this is a teachable moment, right? So what people told us, they found this dashboard very useful, very insightful, but people told us, like, for instance, the speaking time, they would kind of like seeing that signal right before the next meeting started to get this like really in the moment reminder about how to model good behavior for the next meeting. So people liked this, but they almost want it like in the lobby before you go into a meeting. You all know how that feels now. Instead of saying join, maybe you see a little graph of your previous meeting participation before you join. So you can take a second, reflect, and think about how you're going to behave in the next meeting. So that's Meeting Coach. Any questions about that? That's not going to be presented till Kai.
There are some questions.
Okay.
Oh, Ian, did...
In the chat? Or do you want to go ahead?
Show your face, please.
I will be putting the questions in the chat in text. So the question is, does meeting coach work equally well on people from different population groups, women as well as men, people of color as well as white people, women of color as well as white men?
Great question. Of course, that all needs to be asked. We know there are cultural differences. We know there are gender differences in everything we do. We only studied 8 teams of 8 to 10 people. Okay, so this is a very limited trial. We did not see any gender differences in terms of the uptake, but we also didn't get to do a longitudinal enough study because this whole 4 weeks that we had these 8 teams included the iterative design process. So for the first 2 weeks, all they saw were wireframe prototypes. It wasn't until the last 2 meetings that they actually saw their own data. So it wasn't enough time to see behavior change. What our ultimate goal is to see real behavior change. So obviously we're going to be working with the product teams to see what isn't too creepy to include possibly in a meeting analysis and transcript. People are used to their meetings being recorded already. What we would like to see is what kind of features can we put in that would actually encourage behavior change. And that needs much more investigation and research. So great question. Not enough time in 12 weeks to answer that question.
Okay, another question. Do you think there are some dark sides of the emotion research? If machines can detect people's feelings, wouldn't it be easier for centralized control of people's minds, for example, for political activity, promotion of ads?
Of course, there are all kinds of sci-fi novels and short stories written about that. We don't detect emotions. That's a fallacy. No one can detect emotions. No one will ever be able to detect emotions until we get so invasive into your brain. And I'm not using we for that, by the way. All we can detect is your projection, your projected display of affect. And that does not necessarily correlate with your internal affect whatsoever. So the creepiness factor needs to be put at bay because we simply can't do this. And so a lot of these companies, these snake oil companies that are trying to make money using this kind of technology, they are, first of all, they're shopping wares that don't exist. They can't. I think we just saw a CEO step down yesterday of a company that was trying to look at interviewers for jobs using affect sensing technology to try to, I don't know, were they trying to detect lies? I don't know what they were trying to detect, but of course they can't do it. And he just stepped down, and also they declared that they were going to stop doing affect sensing from facial action units. However, they're still analyzing the text-to-speech, the speech-to-text transcript, so that's equally bad. We can't detect emotion. If anyone's interested in this topic, I recommend reading Lisa Feldman-Barrett's book on the topic, or any of her recent shorter articles. She's an excellent, she's the president or the outgoing president of the APA. So she's a very great person to listen to on this topic. Way more sophisticated than I am, by the way, but great question.
And perhaps relatedly, does Meeting Coach have a way for users to feedback to the detection system if it was not accurate? For example, the system senses the user is becoming sad, but the user does not feel like so. How important is this feedback cycle potentially?
This is huge. So everything we do is going to have a machine teaching component to it. That's what we call that. When the user teaches the machine that it got something wrong and needs to get better in the way it's doing estimates and prediction, everything we do will have a machine teaching component, and that's absolutely instrumental for any of these technologies to be successful, because they're always going to be wrong a significant amount of the time. The only case in which I saw using AI to predict emotional situations where it wasn't bad that there were false positives was when we did a system for parents of ADHD children. And when we detected arousal on the parent's wrist because their arousal levels were going up, their galvanic skin response, their sweat was increasing on their wrist. If they knew it wasn't a meltdown with their child, they just ignored it. They didn't care. Because when the system got it right, and predicted a meltdown, it was so advantageous to them to have that, you know, that moment of mindfulness about, okay, I need to model good behavior now, or I just need to step back and not get upset with my child. It was so important to them to have that moment before the meltdown, that they were very tolerant of the machine getting things wrong sometimes. That's the only case in which I've seen people be giving a pretty liberal okay to the system that it's not entirely accurate. For most of these cases, like a meeting coach, I think users are going to want it to be very accurate. So machine teaching component is absolutely necessary. We actually have Gonzalo Ramos and Gina Su on my team who are experts on this topic. So we can't design anything without them advocating for that anyway. So it's awesome. Any more questions?
Maybe we'll take one more before we'll let you continue there.
Okay, I'm almost out of time, so.
Yeah, okay, just one person asked, but you can make decisions based on your perception of affect. Ian always appears grumpy. Maybe we should give him a bad job review, for example. It does not matter that you cannot actually detect emotions, does it?
No, we don't do that, because for the most part, these signals are for your eyes only. They're for you to choose how you want to change your behavior or not. They're not for your manager. They're not for your work group, unless the work group, as in the case of inclusive meeting design, agrees, right? So even today, before you record a video, which anyone could go back and scrutinize, right? Everyone has to agree. And so this technology is no different. But I think you can see that the way we're trying to position it is it's for your eyes only, for your behavior change. It's really meant for that. And we haven't done anything else that is at the group level. The next project I'm talking about is kind of similar. It's very much in the Teams environment, where people have opted in by turning on their cameras. So you have to opt into this.
Okay, we'll let you finish up.
All right, last one. So the last project is called Affective Spotlight. It is to solve the problem that I'm facing right now, where I can't see any of you. I have no idea if you think what I'm saying is hogwash. I have no idea if you're vehemently agreeing with me. I have no idea. It puts the presenter at a great disservice, on a poor footing. Let's just put it that way. So we tried to solve that problem. We all want to be giving talks to audiences that look like this. That's how I'm assuming you all look, but by the questions I can tell that's not true. But what it's really like is presenting like this. I have no clue how you guys feel at all. And it's just horrible as a presenter. And someone who really enjoys presenting, it takes all the pleasure away. So we designed this thing called the Affective Spotlight. It's quite easy to describe. Since I'm running out of time, I'll make it super fast. If you just kind of follow the bouncing numbers here on the left-hand side of the screen, we have the audience turn on their cameras. They send the video streams to Azure. We do an analysis using Sensei, looking at facial landmarks, facial expressions, head gestures. Are you nodding? Are you shaking your head in disagreement? Are you smiling really big? Are you laughing? Are you looking stressed and frustrated? We can extract those features and signals. What we do is, in all of this stuff, we always throw the video away. We just extract the features, and then we say, okay, who was moving the most? Who was the most excited? It doesn't have to be emotional. It was just like movement in general. And from that, then we compute the scores, who's got the highest score. And we grab that person and show that person for 15 seconds in the video. So you can see here, I hope you can see my cursor. Someone's giving a presentation, their PowerPoint slides here, and I'm in the audience. And the spotlight shows me because, you know, I was smiling and moving around. And for 15 seconds, you get to see how I feel, no one else. And then it changes. It picks someone else from the audience, and you get some effective feedback from that audience member for 15 seconds. The only rule was it could never pick the presenter, and then it'll pick someone else. And we studied this with about 117 participants, 14 groups of 8. We had one person randomly chosen from that group of 8 to give the talk. And we had 3 conditions. One was this affective spotlight condition. One was just a randomly chosen person from the group to show every 15 seconds, but not the presenter, obviously, in all cases. And then just the regular Microsoft Teams. So you wouldn't see anybody, like the condition I'm in right now. And what was really cool about the findings, we had done a survey before we designed the system. Obviously, it was clear that people they didn't really want to see people who were tired or sleeping or anything like that. They wanted to see people who were shaking their head shakes or thumbs ups or raised hands or confused or clapping. Mostly people wanted to see positive things, let's put it that way, and not so much the negative things. And what we found from doing this study was that it was very easy to use. It was not distracting, and people really said they liked it. But the most important thing was they were much more aware of their performance to the point that they changed their behavior. So in many instances, the presenter in the affective spotlight condition slowed down. And sometimes they would repeat things because they saw that people really didn't understand it. We had a real interesting measure. This also just got into Kai, where we asked the audience how the speaker did, and then we asked the speaker how they thought they did. And in the affective spotlight condition only was the speaker and the audience much more accurate in terms of their predictions about each other, if that makes sense. And then finally, there was a cool finding where we had less experienced presenters actually had less anxiety about the presentation because they saw how they did, which was really cool. And that happened while they were giving it. So they not only changed their behavior, but their stress levels went down. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying effective computing technology. I don't know if you guys have all seen this Gartner hype cycle, but I think in 2015, that's about where effective computing technology was. And I think now we're probably more in the trough of disillusionment a little bit. And we're trying to figure out exactly where this technology can be best used. And, with things coming out in the press around poor uses of the technology and really poor writing, like the AI for Now article, Kate Crawford, one of my colleagues, was actually one of the co-authors, really poor job describing effective computing technology and how it's actually performed and carried out in the research community. We've kind of felt like we need to take some action as a team. So we've done a lot of work on reducing bias in machine learning around facial expressions. Both Javier and Daniel have been very active on projects around this, but I didn't have time to talk about those today. And we've tried to reposition some of the cognitive services around the face API, the text they're using to describe what they're doing. And I think that's been helpful to some degree. But the most important thing we're doing is this Emotion AI ethics virtual team we've formed. And my team is now partnering with the folks who do responsible AI work at the company and the Ether ethics team to try to examine the various uses that our partners that use Microsoft products are proposing to do. And we're giving them feedback about whether or not it's acceptable or not, and why, and giving them resources to help them understand why or why not they should or should not be using effective computing technologies in this manner. And we've had some really interesting cases put before us around cheating during virtual exams, like for the LSAT, around a lot around remote testing, actually. There have been a few around interviewing that have crossed our desk. So it's been an honor to work with these excellent people on this topic of ethics. And what we're trying to do is provide internal guidelines for Microsoft salespeople and Microsoft employees in general that are working on products, but also we're trying to put out guidelines for the external community as well to try to make people aware of the acceptable and unacceptable uses of this technology, because obviously technology can always be obfuscated for social ill as well as social good. So with that, I'll just end saying we envision a future where the workplace is much less stressful, and we're hoping we can do something about it, and we've got a good start. We're calling it M365 Care, supporting everyone to achieve more. And I think I'll stop on that. Oh, nope, I'll stop on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I can clap for everyone, I guess. But,
it's not the same.
There's some digital way to clap, but I'm not too sure how to do it. Yeah, incredibly relevant and timely topic, right? There's many things that we're all dealing with right now, and even on a meta level, you're dealing with it right now, literally. You're all giving the talk, so
yes, that's right.
I think we're unfortunately out of time for more questions, because we do also, relevant to this, we've packed your schedule with more Zoom meetings.
Okay, great.
Really stress you out and exhaust you. And but yeah, I speak for everyone. This was a great talk, and I think very informative.
Thank you. All right. Well, tell me where to go next. I'm happy to jump to my next meeting. Is it in that email?
It's in that email. Yeah, there's a Zoom meeting for the HCI students. Yep.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks, Mary. I'll go to the other Zoom.